Okay. Hello again to everyone, and hi to any new attendees who just hopped on here. My name is Alex Mitchell, and I'm a communications manager for the Lighthouse marketing team. And thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Today, we're going to be analyzing the results of our 2022 Wage and Morale Survey of medical laboratory professionals. This was a new endeavor for our company, first time this year. So we're really excited to jump into those results and offer some, analysis from our expert speakers. For a quick introduction, I want to introduce Tara Luellen. She is our Vice President of Laboratory Director Services, and she's worked with the company for almost 7 years now. Prior to joining Lighthouse, she was a practicing psychologist, and that training and experience has contributed to her success in recruiting and account management in the lab industry. I'd also like to introduce Maggie Morrissey, our Director of Recruiting and Staffing. Maggie has spent the past 10 years growing and managing teams, focusing on employee retention and well being, coupled with client satisfaction and success. While overseeing the recruiting and staffing department within Lighthouse, Maggie interacts with both lab employers and employees on a daily basis and keeps her fingers on the pulse of what makes employees want to stay at and join clinical laboratories. So, a huge thank you to both of them today for giving us their time and putting a little expert analysis behind the results of our survey. Couple housekeeping items I'd like to touch on. You can reduce your chance of lagging by closing any bandwidth heavy apps you have in the background. This will be recorded, so no need to ask for the recording. It's automatically going to be sent to the email you registered with tomorrow before noon. No need to ask if you have questions. Please drop those in the Q&A section right next to the chat and polls box. We'll be looking at those throughout the webinar and then set aside some time at the end to address what we have time for. And if we don't have time to answer your question, we highly encourage you to follow up with us. There's going to be several opportunities to reach out to us directly or contact information throughout. We're going to be running polls during the webinar, and we encourage you to participate in those to just help with engagement. If you'd rather not do the poll, just feel free to X out of it when you see that pop up on your screen and continue on with listening. And there's also a handout section next to the polls, the Q&A and chat function on the right-hand side. We encourage you to review those documents, more information about our company, the services we offer that we'll be highlighting today, and also the PDF copy of the report if you'd like to view it. Quickly, a little bit about Lighthouse. We're the nation's leading and most trusted end-to-end full-service clinical lab consulting and recruiting firm. Whether you're looking to start a company or grow your current business, we offer laboratories a way to accelerate their success. And we have a number of new divisions and enhanced service offerings we'll be announcing this fall. We're really excited to do that rollout. So, please stay tuned with our social media and newsletters to hear more about those announcements as they come. And then just quickly, if you're interested ever in recruiting services, our recruiting team specializes exclusively in the clinical lab industry, filling permanent and travel positions for roles at all levels in labs across the country. We offer risk-free recruiting and staffing with a 90-day guarantee on any candidates we place in your clinical lab. And we also offer services for the recruiting of full and part-time lab directors. So please, if you're interested in following up with those or with us on those services, you can fill out the form through that link. You'll have an opportunity to do so later in the webinar as well, or you can just email us directly. Now, to launch into the survey, just quickly, I wanted to provide a brief overview before I turn it over to Tara and Maggie. In total, we collected data from 1,112 U.S. medical laboratory professionals during April and May of this year. The respondents were contacted through our newsletters, social media, and other outreach channels such as direct emails. And our objective with this was really just to kind of provide an overview of the industry, help inform the community of current wage, staffing, and overall satisfaction levels, and providing the respondents who filled out the survey with some actionable data that could be used to inform future career choices. It was a really interesting time for the medical laboratory community coming out of the height of the pandemic over the past 2+ years. And so we thought it was, a really great time to try to dive in and look at some of these figures. Because this is a first time survey, the stats cited don't have a comparable internal reference point. But that being said, we intend to conduct this annually moving forward. And we have identified a few areas for future improvement. We want to be able to break down the demographics by gender to look for any pay disparities there. Uh, a more rigorous position verification to help us filter out any bad data or irrelevant wage data. And then we'd like to collect statistically representative sample sizes for all states and geographic regions. But with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Tara.
To speak on this with Maggie. I will start by just giving a little bit of background on some of the survey data. The first slide that we have here covers the experience of the respondents. So 36% of those respondents indicated that they actually had more than 21 years of experience, which we were excited to see such seasoned participants in our survey. So you can see there that we had over 400 respondents that had more than 21 years of experience, and then over time, they're less than 5 years of experience, 215, 6 to 10, 202, and so on and so forth. And the breakdown for the complexity levels of the labs, which these individuals are currently working in, are 75% worked within a high complexity lab or a lab that does at least some high complexity testing. 23% worked in a moderate complexity only testing lab, and 2% were from waived laboratories. For the next slide, I'll turn it over to Maggie to talk about demographics.
Yes, so demographically, the majority of respondents were comprised of bench level employees. So we had about 50%, just under 50%, were technologists. The 21% were managers. 17% were technicians, so with an associate's level degree, and then 7% were administrative lab directors and 4% were medical lab directors. We'll touch on those two different lab director types a little bit later. There was some overlap there. Additionally, 71% of the people who responded to the survey were white or Caucasian. The next largest group were Black or African American at 11%, and the remainder were kind of a mixed group of Asians or Pacific Islanders, multiracial or biracial, and Native American or Alaska Native. Oops, my bad.
I gave a speech at the Executive War College a couple of months ago about the Great Resignation and hiring lab directors and pathologists specifically. And this was some of the data I pulled for that speech. But I wanted to touch briefly on this because it's so important for our discussion on retention to understand that a higher than normal level of individuals are choosing to leave their jobs. And so I thought I would start by just defining what the Great Resignation is. Some people are calling it the Big Quit, kind of like that. It's a little catchier, but it's a current economic trend in which a higher than normal number of employees in the United States voluntarily resigned their position amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. And to the right there is a graph that shows the number of individuals that willingly quit their jobs month over month. And the orange line there is 2021. So what that shows is that a much larger than normal amount of individuals chose to voluntarily quit their jobs or resign their jobs or switch jobs in 2021 as compared to other years. And this goes back to 2001. And the average number of individuals that left their jobs in 2021 was almost 4 million per month, which is staggering. What's driving the Great Resignation? A few things that we're hearing and a few things that we're seeing in the data from Pew Research Center in particular. Low pay, 63% of people reported that was the reason that they switched jobs or left the industry. No opportunities for advancement, 63% as well. And then employees feeling disrespected at work was more than 50%, 57%. And we can equate that to kind of toxic work environments that we've all heard about. So feeling disrespected, it's not a pleasant work environment for one reason or another. And it just doesn't foster good individual growth or collaborative growth within the company. Anecdotally, the pandemic appears to have been the spark that resulted in employees more in-depth analysis of what their job offers them, and they're taking a bigger look at these factors, and that's what our recruiters are hearing when they're speaking to candidates. We talked about the graph that showed the number of people leaving their jobs in 2021, but we're continuing to see this trend in 2022 as these individual employees analyze what's important to them in a job, as well as a work environment, employment opportunity, and community, which is what individuals are seeking in the current market and environment. And that's how they're discussing opportunities with us. They want to know not only what are they going to be paid, but what's the trajectory for a career path? What's the employee environment like? What is the collaboration level with other employees and things like that? So employees are becoming more and more critical of what their jobs are offering them, and they're frankly looking for more. They're focusing more on work-life balance and spending time with their family. And there are companies and labs in the industry that are meeting them there. And so if we want to retain high-level talent, we need to be making those strides as well. Maggie, do you want to talk about the different salaries broken down by position?
Absolutely. So we asked part of within this wage and morale survey, we asked each different position to kind of share their current salary that they were making in 2021. And what we found was that with California being an exception, broadly speaking, the United States as a whole is making an average salary of these amounts here. So we've split out California because the California salary rates are so much higher than the rest of the country. So with the lab assistants and the accessioners, $48,000 a year compared to $59,000 a year, we think that is relatively accurate based on our own internal data that we have from all of the different jobs that we're posting and working with our clients on. On the technician side, and again, these are the associate's level degree folks, that is $55,000 to $65,000, 55 non-California, 65 California, supervisor level. And this is where it gets a little interesting, is the supervisor and manager level, and then the administrative lab director and the lab director. So the manager and the supervisor level, we didn't split out technical supervisor from general supervisor. And we found that the supervisor salary was, at least in California, a little bit higher than the manager salary, which we don't believe is accurate based on our own internal data. What we found is that within, and this, it's not just in California, it's also non-California. What we have found is that a manager's salary will be higher than a general supervisor's salary by, several thousands of dollars, depending on the location. It could be anywhere between $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. It really varies by area, but by and large, the manager's salary is going to be higher than a general supervisor's salary. The technical supervisor's salary will potentially be higher than the manager's salary. It really depends on the level of experience of the person and how long they've been in the role. They also could have, this is all self-identifying. So anyone who is, they're self-identifying as a supervisor, they might be self-identifying as a supervisor because they're a technical supervisor. They could also be a manager. So there's some areas that we want to tweak for next year, just that we can really dig in deeper on these questions. But and all the responses to the questions. But that is something that we did want to note, is that we are going to kind of dig in on that a little bit more next year. So the manager and the supervisor salaries we don't believe are as accurate as the technologist, technician, and lab assistant. We also didn't have as much of a sample size of those of the manager and supervisor as we did the technologist. So we're really confident in our technologist responses. And then with the lab director and the administrative lab director, it was very similar. So we believe that there were people who are self-identifying as lab director who were actually administrative lab directors. And those folks are kind of more on the operations side. The administrative lab directors are more on the operational side of things. So these are the folks who are, sitting on as operations. They might be VP. You might retitle them, right? Rename them as VP of operations, director of operations. But oftentimes within the lab, they're called a lab director or an administrative lab director, an operations lab director. And so if you see lab director, you click that and then you're putting your salary in. We don't believe that that is accurate for the actual lab director, the CLIA lab director positions. This would be the more medical, the medical lab director, which Tara is going to touch on a little bit more in the next slide.
Yes. Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, I found that the lab director salaries, and when we say lab director, we meant CLIA medical lab director. And like Maggie mentioned, in reviewing and analyzing the data, it really seemed that selection was incorrectly chosen by some individuals, and that brought the salary down. And I am going to share some information about what we're seeing in the industry from my team who recruits lab directors and pathologists specifically, both on a full-time and part-time basis, and how we are going to, that's going to help us adjust for next year. We are going to create some better questions, as Alex mentioned earlier, so that we can really drill into what these CLIA medical lab directors are making across the industry to have better data for you then. And as Maggie mentioned, administrative lab director is more focused on operations and administration. They likely possess a bachelor's degree or higher, but may not necessarily have a doctoral degree. But their position is typically full-time on site. They're a leader of their laboratory. A medical lab director, on the other hand, a CLIA lab director, their main focus in general is compliance. For high complexity labs, they must possess a doctoral degree and a board certification based on the current CLIA guidelines. And that may vary from state to state, of course, but that's kind of the baseline qualification for a high complexity lab director presently. And this individual could be part-time or full-time. As I mentioned, we run a part-time lab director program. So we supply almost 300 part-time lab directors to mostly small to moderately sized laboratories across the US. And so this individual could be there on a full-time basis, depending on the size of the laboratory, the types of testing that they do, and what other hats they may be wearing for the laboratory in addition to the CLIA medical lab director role. But they also could be very part-time and not on site very much. We just thought it would be helpful to distinguish between the two levels of lab directors, because there is a lot of confusion amongst the industry in, what each person does, and because the term lab director is oftentimes utilized for both. And here's the information from my team's takeaways from their jobs that they were made successful placements in with pathologists and lab directors in 2021. And another similar data points to point that that the salaries that we received on the survey for what we meant to be CLIA medical laboratory directors were on the low side. So for the placements that we made with laboratories in 2021, when we were placing a full-time laboratory director, and this was a high complexity board certified doctoral level lab director in all cases, the average salary that they earned was $183,000. That's the base salary. Obviously, we're not, we didn't pull people on additional compensation, bonus structures, things like that. This is simply base salary. And in general, obviously, as Maggie mentioned, that number is going to be higher in California. The cost of living and the cost of doing business is higher in California, and thus the salaries are also higher as a result. And here's what we are preparing our clients with in terms of generalities when they come to us seeking a full-time lab director. In California, individuals who are qualified are going to make about $250,000 or more as a base salary. And obviously that can go up based on experience, based on the qualifications, based on the needs of the lab. And everywhere else in the US, it's going to be $175,000 or more. Obviously that varies based on region. New York is going to be higher than 175, but maybe just a little bit less than 250, depending on what your needs are. And we do unique searches for each of our clients. So there is a little bit of variability there. And then on top of that, pathologists who were not surveyed specifically during this outreach, they tend to start around $300,000 across the US, and it can be up or down a little bit depending on their experience and what they're doing specifically. But those are some general guidelines if you're hiring this type of person, what you may need to spend. Maggie, do you want to offer a couple of recruiting tips that we think for
Yeah.
all roles?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we see, especially with smaller labs, this isn't necessarily the case with, hospital labs or larger reference labs, but compensation packages. A lot of times, the laboratory, especially the smaller labs, will think about just the salary or the hourly rate. And so we have come up with some ideas for our clients, and if you work with us on recruiting on the recruiting side, we're happy to share in more depth with you on this. But there are several things within a compensation package that are really, really important and can lead to an increased morale and view of an organization. So the first thing is offering a bonus structure. We found that bonus structures that are based around the success of the organization as well as the success of the individual are really, really great for building morale and also giving people a feeling like they are contributing to an organization, which is a really important part of retention. When you're thinking about retaining and keeping employees, one of the biggest things that you want to think about is how they view their current employer, whether that is their manager or the actual broad employer umbrella. And so having a bonus structure that allows them to feel like they are actually contributing to the organization and to the organization's revenue, et cetera, really, really great. And the other is offering a 401k. This is another really great option. You can also do a Roth or an IRA. There are a lot of different type of retirement benefit options that you can offer to your organization or to your employees. It doesn't have to be a straight 401k, but offering a match is a really great way to kind of give back to your organization or give back to your employees as well. Offering relocation if they are not already local. I can't tell you the number of times we get on a call with a client or a potential client and they say, we always ask, do you offer a relocation bonus? And they say, oh no, we haven't thought of that. And you'd be surprised because, if let's say you're based in Nashville, Tennessee, there's only so many people who live within Nashville, Tennessee. And as we know, there is a staffing shortage within the medical technologist field. So the likelihood that you're going to be somehow finding these new candidates that have the experience that you need and that they're going to come to your organization is pretty slim, right? It could happen. Maybe you find that perfect person, but most likely you are going to have to look outside of your base city or home city, and even outside of your home state. And so you have to think about ways to entice those people to come to your city. Now, a city like Nashville, people want to move there. It's a very popular city. Maybe you don't have to offer as large of a relocation package or even a signing bonus, something along those lines. But you still want to make it worth their while to move. You don't want it to cost them money to move to your organization or to move to work for your organization. So something that you just want to consider. I just mentioned a sign-on bonus. That is another really big one. We saw it much more during the kind of the peak of the pandemic, but we are still seeing them now as well. They vary from between $2,000 and $10,000 at the sign-on, and they're paid out in a variety of different ways. Some of them, especially the lower amounts, are paid out upon signing. Others are paid out over the course of a year or even over the course of 3 years, which ensures that the person will actually stay. So it's another way of retaining their employees. And so if you are having trouble recruiting, you are having trouble, with your with that, then that is something that you might want to consider opening up for. Additionally, when you're posting the job, if you're posting it on job boards, making sure that you're posting it on job boards outside of your city as well. Let's say you're in Nashville, maybe you want to post it in Knoxville, maybe you also want to post it in Virginia, something along those lines, trying to draw people to the Nashville area. The other potential incentives, I mentioned this, but performance bonuses and the flat sign-on bonuses paid after 60 to 90 days. Other things that you can do that I think are really they're really innovative, I guess, and different, but maybe they don't quote unquote cost money. straight money, right? Offering, fun things to do around the office, not just on lab week, but on throughout the year. So trying to show appreciation to your employees. That's something that we've seen some of the larger hospitals do, and it helps so much with hiring as well. So being able to say like, oh yes, you have like, there's 6 times a year where we get together, we have a party, something along those lines, having some type of culture or event that you're doing where you're trying to drive culture within your organization. And then also having potentially, if you can offer improved and enhanced PTO days, separating out your sick days from PTO, you'd be surprised how much that helps when somebody signs on for an organization. Being able to take a sick day versus a vacation day when they are actually sick, that just feels good, right? It feels better, even if it's the same number of days. At the end of the day, it just feels better to be able to take a sick day than a vacation, than to use one of your vacation days on that time you got the flu or COVID. And so, we see those as well. So those are the major things that you can really think about when you're talking about compensation package. And it's important that you review that with your HR team. Don't just think about, oh, I want to pay my team, I want to bring on a technologist, I want to pay them $35 an hour, let's just say. Think about, I want to bring on a technologist, I want to pay them $35 an hour. This is going to be the performance bonus that I have. They're going to have this sign-on bonus potentially, or if they negotiate, there's room for the sign-on bonus in there. Relocation if necessary. We're going to give them a 401k. We're going to give them PTO and sick days. So you want to have all of that built out before you start looking for your employees. That's really, really important.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about all of this in terms of recruiting someone, but to Maggie's point, this is how you also retain those high-level employees. Yes. You show this investment in them and their person and their career trajectory and their growth from the start, and that's how they become invested in you and your company and your larger goals as well. So these are recruiting tips as well as retention tips.
And we've actually found that when you do these things, when you invest in someone, they invest back in you, their outputs improve. And so suddenly they're more efficient. They're doing more work for you. And so it's little things that you can do. Like even if you just set up every 2 months, you had some type of culture event with your office, with your team, you'd be surprised how much more output you could get from your employees by just showing them how that you appreciate them. It doesn't cost you a lot, but it shows them that you care.
And they're looking for that community, and that helps to check that box. And like Maggie said, invest in them and they'll invest in you. So it just will reward you tenfold, I think. Here's some more recruiting tips. And these are kind of pitfalls to avoid. Honestly, our biggest tip is just give feedback. Give too much feedback. Doesn't matter who you're working with, whether that is a recruiter or an HR manager, but give them all the feedback. Tell them the minute details of why you're passing on a particular candidate. Explain why another candidate seems like a great option to explore and the differences. What may seem like trivial information to you can actually be the thing upon which successfully hiring someone hinges when you're working with a recruiter or even your own internal HR manager. And this goes for retention as well. You want to hire the right person so that you can retain them, and having everyone have a consistent understanding of what you're looking for is the best way to go about that recruiting process. And as recruiters, one of the biggest problems that we experience with our clients is obtaining feedback in a timely manner. This occurs throughout the recruiting cycle, but it's especially detrimental to the process during 2 specific times. Those being when the candidate is first submitted for your consideration, so when they apply essentially for the job, and then the second time being after an interview has occurred, whether that's phone, virtual, in person, or otherwise. And here's why. Candidates who are on the market for new jobs, they don't remain available for very long. So if a recruiter or your HR manager presents you with a qualified candidate to consider, that candidate is in most cases likely considering other opportunities concurrently. Maggie mentioned earlier the supply-demand issue, the lab staffing shortage, and given the fact that the supply of candidates for laboratory positions is not currently meeting the demand, you not only have to take your opportunity and set it apart, but you also have to put forth the effort into hiring the person and do so quickly so that you don't miss out. Taking even one extra day to respond to a candidate's resume that you've been sent could mean missing out on the opportunity to hire them, because laboratory professionals are being hired that quickly in the industry right now. So one of the biggest things I can encourage you to do is give feedback as soon as you can. If you're not interested to interview the person, it's okay to say exactly that to the person you're working with to hire this individual. I'm assuming that's a recruiter or an HR manager, and it's okay to have honest, transparent feedback, because otherwise they're not going to be able to adjust their search to meet your needs. This communication is best if it is open, transparent, and honest. As a recruiter, I can vouch that we're professionals, and we'll find a way to break the news easily to a candidate that they are not the right fit for your particular position. Honestly, we deliver that news way more often to candidates than we get to celebrate a job offer with them. And we would never provide feedback in an unfeeling or insensitive manner. In all honesty, it would not be in our best interest, because for an external recruiting firm such as ourselves, we probably hope to place that candidate in a position that is a better fit for them and the organization. But really providing the direct feedback to the person you're working with to hire this, or to your hiring committee, is pivotal to the success in hiring the right person, and then taking those efforts and that input and turning it into retention strategies will help you keep them for the long term as well. And then lastly, if you don't have an internal HR manager that knows your particular business, one of our best suggestions is to work with someone that knows your particular industry. For example, Lighthouse is niched into pathology and laboratories. We have our finger on the pulse of what's going on in the lab industry. We understand the requirements for the various roles that are mandated for different kinds of testing and things like that. And those are not things that you can quickly learn overnight. So if you are working with someone who is specialized in what you're trying to accomplish, the end result is likely to be more positive. The next slide discusses lower morale, and recent hires are reporting a little bit lower morale in general, and those are people with 5 years of experience or less. They're reporting lower morale as compared to the more seasoned individuals in the lab. And Maggie and I were talking before while we were preparing for this, and we're just like, this is so important to point out that how important it is to pour into your employees and provide them with the things that they need, support them, encourage their growth, create a community that they feel well supported in order to retain them, because these individuals that are just entering the lab industry are already vocalizing their distaste with it in some way, shape, or form. And anything that you can do to make your work environment better for them is going to equate to longer retention. And so we just feel like that was a really important data point to be sure to mention, that the morale of more recently trained or more recently employed lab professionals that have fewer years of experience is significantly lower than that of more seasoned professionals. And we need to keep our eye on this and do better for these individuals if we hope to keep them in the lab industry, or else the staffing shortage will just continue to get worse, essentially. Maggie, did you have some thoughts on the lower morale, or anything you wanted to share on this slide?
I think that it's interesting. One thing that we do hear regularly from candidates is that they feel like they're unappreciated. We hear that a lot, that they're unappreciated in their current role. And a lot of times when you ask, like, what makes you think that? What do you mean? And they say, our lab, they kind of, especially this would be especially true if they work in a larger organization. So the kind of the opposite of what I was saying earlier. But if they work in a hospital lab, large reference lab, et cetera, they say, we work in a small, in a not necessarily small, but in a closed space. We don't get to interact with patients. We're given samples, and then we're running the samples, and then we're delivering results. And so we don't have a lot of human interaction, and we don't feel appreciated. We don't feel like people know what we do within the organization. This would be especially true for hospitals, healthcare systems, and we feel like for Lab Week, we're shown some appreciation, but a lot of it is lip service. And so that's another reason why I was really highlighting some of the things that you can do culturally within your lab to try to make them feel a little bit more appreciated outside of Lab Week, especially. We love Lab Week at Lighthouse. We do a huge week of Lab Week for our employees as well. But we also, one thing that I love about our company is that we also do quite a bit of culture growth, team building work outside of Lab Week, and we really do try to show appreciation for our team members outside of Lab Week. And so that, I think, is something that was a huge takeaway for me when I saw these. My mind immediately went to those anecdotal stories that I've heard from people who who we work with or who are in our Facebook group. For example, we run one of the largest Facebook groups for laboratory staff and personnel, and so I'm an admin in it, so I get to see everything, all the commentary and everything that goes on. And that's one of the most common things that we hear, is that they just feel unappreciated.
We had an interesting question, I think, that goes right along with this, and I'm going to go ahead and answer that. Katie mentioned those with less experience reporting less satisfaction. Is that unique to lab or just the style of the next generation? And I went into great depth of this in my speech at the Executive War College and broke it down in terms of generational cohorts and how that view of your employment has shifted over the course of the last couple of generations. And so I think your point is well taken. It is this generation of more the people that are entering the industry now, I guess, after training, we're seeing more and more of that dissatisfaction with that cohort. I agree. And I don't think that it is going to shift back the other way, though. And I think we as an industry need to shift with them and need to have a better understanding of what employees are looking for. No longer is it just the salary that's going to, keep them in a job. It's the whole package, not just the whole compensation package, but the community, the amount of support, what the company is offering that employee, all the things that Maggie and I have been talking about that are important for individuals in that generation and are, as they age. What we've seen across the industry in terms of the generational cohort is that it's been a slight change across a couple of generations to get to this point. And so I think that employees are only going to continue to expect more of their employers, especially as the supply-demand issue remains the same. So yes, it is kind of a new thing for the current generation that's entering the workforce to be doing this kind of analysis that we didn't see other generations doing of what their employment is offering them. But I think it's an opportunity to, address the fact that this shift is changing in most people's minds and to do things to address it in order to retain highly qualified folks. In terms of the staffing impact on morale, you can see most people are pretty satisfied with their job or neutral, but a lot of their labs are understaffed. 73%. That's almost 3 in every 4 labs. Someone that is participating in our survey is reporting some level of understaffing, and that can have a huge impact on morale. If all you feel like you're doing when you come into work is treading water because you can't accomplish anything, you can't grow further because you're handling the job of more than one person due to understaffing, then what is the opportunity for you to feel satisfied or fulfilled by your job? It's greatly reduced. Maggie, what is your team seeing in terms of the satisfaction and understaffing?
Yeah, so I actually did a presentation to the Dark Report last month on this. Laboratories are understaffed as a rule. And what we're finding is that there are fewer people who are graduating with degrees in laboratory science as medical technologists than were in the past. And there are also fewer programs. So one big question that we had at the in that Dark Report presentation was, what do we do? How do we attract these folks? And I really think that there's a few ways. The first is, if you are in a if you're in a a city that has a university or a community college, you should work with your university and community college both to establish a medical technologist program if possible, or to bring on internships and interns into your organization. And you can hire folks who have biology and chemistry degrees, and they are eligible for CLIA to work under CLIA as technologists after 3 months. So you can kind of have them on as interns, sessioning, doing things like that, kind of operating as like a technician at first. And then after the 3-month period, you can bring them on as technologists. If you're in a state that doesn't require a license, that's a great way for you to bring on new staff. I personally believe that the reason why there's a couple of reasons why there's such a high or low morale within the organizations. One is understaffing. One is that there's a low focus on retention and culture, and a lot of smaller labs, especially, and this is true across the board, not just with labs, across the entire country, across the world. When you're a smaller company, when you're a startup, you're not as focused on what your culture is. Your culture is simply whatever it is at that moment. And unfortunately, with labs, that can be pretty difficult. It can be a very, very tough thing for organizations to build, and it can easily turn sour. So as we think about retention, as we think about engagement, just to kind of slide into this next slide, employees respond positively when leadership engages with their ideas. When leadership is present in the lab and providing positive feedback to employees, engagement and morale are also increased. So I recommend that you're meeting, if you're a manager or if you're the owner, that you're meeting with your direct reports at least once a month. If you're not doing that, start adding that to your calendar. It's super, super important that you're meeting with them. You should come with an agenda. The agenda can be the exact same every single time that you meet with them. It doesn't have to be different. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time, but you can have the exact same agenda, and you should be meeting with them at least once a month. I personally meet with my more senior employees, anyone who's been in my organization for more than 6 months. I meet with them every 2 weeks. And the people who are new to my organization, so have been here for less than 6 months, I meet with once a week. And the reason being that we work in a very fast-paced environment. I want to give feedback very quickly. I like giving immediate feedback to my employees. And so I want to be able to kind of share that feedback with them. It's a great time. I run a large organization. I don't always speak to them every day because of that. And we're also all remote. And so it's a great time for me also to catch up with them, learn what's going on in their lives, and just have a chance to do a quick check-in, see where their head's at as well. So trying to build an engaged employee through that direct manager relationship is super, super important. And engaged employees will actually outperform disengaged employees by almost 28%. And this is what we were talking about, what I was alluding to earlier in the conversation, where I mentioned, you want to build this, you want to build an organization that focuses on the retention, that focuses on the engagement of the employee, because they are going to outperform your unengaged employees. And you can have a direct impact on that, which is amazing. A lot of people think I can't impact whether or not somebody wants to come to work or not, but you can. Trust me, having a good boss is a really good reason to want to come to work. I've had good bosses, I've had bad bosses, and both of them it really changes things when you have a good boss. Setting key performance metrics. So another thing that this is kind of my mantra is, being able to establish metrics within the lab that might be like how quickly, how many samples are they pipetting, how many samples are they running. All of these are things that you probably have stats for and access to. And so you can think about what the goals are that you want to set your employees, and you don't want them to be too high, right? You don't want them to be out of reach. You want them to be, this is good. This is a good goal. This is a good goal that I want them to reach, whether it's 100 samples, 500 samples, whatever it is, you want to set it. And then when you meet with your employee in that check-in, you talk about it. You say, okay, well, what did you think you did this week that allowed you to either hit it or not hit it? What can we do differently next week? How can we help you achieve this? And the last thing is really keeping employees informed on how the company is doing and showing them that you trust them by giving them autonomy within their positions. This is extremely important. If a company doesn't, or not a company, if an employee doesn't know how well the company is doing, they are lost. They don't understand how their personal work impacts the organization. And that is so important for the organization. It is extremely important for an employee to understand exactly how they impact the organization. And that can be, if you're in HR, that can be, what have you worked on this year that has allowed us to move from point A to point B. If you're a technologist, that might be how many samples did you pipette this week or this month, and how many samples did we do overall? There's a lot of different ways that you can kind of show that. I recommend that you do quarterly meetups with all of your team so that you can deliver those results to them and kind of show, and you can cater it to them, right? Like you don't have to show them your revenue figures or anything along those lines. That's something that you want to show, but you can show other figures that kind of show them what their impact is on the day-to-day. So improving retention, don't just increase your compensation. It is very tempting to just throw more money at somebody and say, this will help, they'll stay. But it's actually not a reason why people stay in their organization. Most people stay for other reasons. They stay because of a relationship that they have with their boss. They stay because they feel like they're having an impact on the community or on a broader scale. And they also stay because they enjoy the work that they're doing and they feel engaged in that work that they're doing. And so you want to create that for them and give them those kind of internal reasons to stay at an organization. So an external reason would be more money, right? I'm going to give you more money. An internal reason is like something that drives me internally to do this. And that's going to be, for me personally, it's feeling like I have an impact with my specific organization, that I am making them to be the most productive, but also happiest people that they can be within the organization. That's what drives me to stay at my company. And so figuring out what that driver is within your group, and then working and then kind of giving that to them will really, really, really boost productivity. So creating and publicizing a clear path of growth for employees, you have it built in with CLIA. CLIA gives you a clear path of growth as an employee, right? You can go from being just a technologist to general supervisor to a technical supervisor potentially. Probably won't ever make it to lab director, but you could unless you got your PhD or your MD. But there are very clear paths. Now you can add other paths, other stops along that path as well. You could add, team leads. You could add, tech 2, tech 3, etc. Managers. We'd be happy to help you with this organizational tree if you'd ever be interested. I've worked with several clients on this in the past, helping them build out their organizational map so that they can kind of publish this type of path of growth for their employees. You want to analyze the current job market in your area and the salary and benefits that are being offered by competitors. So this is another thing that a lot of clients come to us. They don't realize even what the current salary range is in their region. I saw a question kind of at the beginning about New York City, and that's another area that is extremely competitive when it comes to the salary ranges offered. It's not as competitive as San Francisco. It's more in line with LA or Los Angeles, but it is still very competitive. If you work or you have a company in the New York area, the New York City the city area, including Long Island or Northern New Jersey, you probably are offering a different salary than if you're in upstate New York, for example, in Syracuse. And you want to be aware of that. And that's a very obvious example that I'm giving here. Everybody knows that New York salary is higher than Syracuse salary, but maybe you don't know by how much. Maybe you've been paying your techs. You've had techs in the role for 15 years. And so you haven't really given it a lot of thought about how much the salary should be, but you should start thinking about it. Investing in training to cultivate strong managers. So people who understand employees' interests and motivations and go to bat for their workers. This kind of ties into the last slide where I was talking about, as an owner or as a director level person, you do want to meet with your direct employees. That would be included in the managers. It's not just the lab techs that need to be shown appreciation and be trained and be helped, to mentored to improve. And then meeting employees on a weekly basis. I really do recommend weekly at first. Going to biweekly at a minimum monthly is good.
We had a comment about compensation not being a primary retention tool, but it is a retention tool. And I just want to say that, yes, we agree. We're not saying to, do away with compensation increases by any means. Your compensation, the raises, increases in compensation need to keep in line with industry standard. We hear a lot of complaints from candidates who are making less money. They've been in a job for 5 years and now they're making less money than a newly hired person because of the market increase. You've got to do the compensation raises to match industry to keep those highly talented people, as well as all of the additional things that we are suggesting here to retain high quality talent. I just wanted to mention that before we conclude.
No, thank you, Tara. I think that was a great point to add on there. And for our conclusion, in terms of the overall survey analysis, I think Tara and Maggie both touched on it very well, so I won't beat a dead horse here. But better lab staffing industry-wide would reduce the amount of burnout being felt by the newest members of the industry that our survey found were reporting the lowest levels of morale. And we must also do more to advocate for more lab degrees and training programs to increase that staffing pipeline. I just want to say quickly here, we're going to go over to Q&A just for a few minutes that we have left. But if anybody did not get the chance at the beginning to open that form and was interested in following up with us for our recruiting or lab director services, you now have the chance again to do so. So please fill that out and we'll follow up with you shortly. For questions, I know Maggie and Tara have answered a few already. I did see an interesting one I wanted to pose to both of you. From Jeanette Smith, how has Lighthouse responded to the CMS proposal to fill lab roles with nursing staff? I didn't know. It's something I've been reading about this week. Didn't know if either of you had seen that proposal and had any thoughts on it.
I'll be honest and say I haven't read the full proposal. I have heard of this. Interestingly enough, actually, while I was in my car this morning driving to the office, I heard a radio ad for sign-on bonuses for nurses in our area, and they're offering a $20,000 sign-on bonus for one particular hospital system and a $15,000 sign-on bonus for other hospital systems. So nurses are also in high demand, and I am not sure that necessarily is the end-all be-all solution. It could help with the staffing shortage. Nurses do come from a healthcare training background. They wouldn't, necessarily be the worst choice for learning laboratory techniques as well, by any means. We know nurses are very highly qualified for what they're doing. It's a very different role. That's one thing to consider, is that, nurses have a lot of direct patient care. And we all know that's not what happens in a lab. So, I think that could work, that could help for the right individuals. I don't know that that's necessarily going to solve all of the staffing shortage problems. I think that going about it in the ways that we have outlined here in terms of retaining high quality talent is a better way to keep people from jumping from the industry. we have a lot of people that we lose that go to other industries because of the burnout and things that Maggie in particular touched on. So I think investing in our individuals that are already highly trained in laboratory techniques is a great way to keep the individuals that already have the right qualifications there, but that there are other ways that we can invest in other potential ways to address the staffing issues, and that will also help the retention of other individuals in those labs, as we mentioned, the understaffing being one of the biggest problems for morale.
I would just add to that. I believe that in the past, and I don't know if it's still part of the CMS regulations, but in the past, in rural areas, nurses could evaluate tests. Now, that was under the Obama administration, and I know that the ASCP and the ASCLS really did not. They lobbied very hard to have that rule removed, but I don't know if you would spark something within me, Jeanette, asking that question, and so I went back to look, and I don't see anything about it actually ever getting removed. So I love this question. I've been on vacation, so I haven't had a chance to see this rule, or this proposal. So now I just jotted it down as something to look at. My answer would just be there's a nursing shortage too, so I don't know what they think they're going to fix. I just don't see it. I don't see it getting fixed here.
It certainly doesn't sound like it's a silver bullet, but we'll see.
Laboratorians were paid on par with nurses. Edmund, you sound just like the folks in the Facebook group that we have. We hear that quite frequently as well.
All right, so we're approaching the hour here, and I wanted to go ahead and wrap up. Just really quickly here, if we'll be looking at more of a revenue issue, the SALSA Act, during our next webinar at the end of August. That would look to add an amendment and fix outdated PAMA repricing models that have really impacted the CLFS over the last 5+ years. So please, if you're interested in that issue, we're going to have a couple lobbyists from the National Independent Laboratory Association on to walk us through that issue and what we can do to support that act to fix PAMA before it goes into effect again next year. So with that being said, thanks again for joining us today. Thank you to Tara and Maggie. Greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you all next month. Bye.
Thank you guys very much.